Dr. K. S. Ramakrishnan is working as an assistant professor, School of Education, Tamil Nadu Open University, Chennai 15. He has been teaching science education, environmental science, educational technology and research methodology in various colleges of education and Tamil Nadu Open University for the past 9 years. He has guided so many M.Ed, M.Phil and PhD students. His current research areas are environmental education, educational technology and media and communication. He has conducted various workshops on ICT usage in education, Wiki Educator, e-content development and education research methodology. He had attended many online workshops on Moodle, learning analytics. He has published 6 books and many articles in national and international journals of repute. He regularly gives plenary and keynote speeches on environment and ICT related issues at various national and international conferences. He has delivered 28 episodes of the program Pudiyodor Ulagam at All India Radio, Chennai, related to various new developments in science and technology.
Welcome to UGC CEC program. In this episode, we are going to discuss about the ozone depletion. And the topics that we are going to discuss, what is ozone layer and what are the causes for ozone depletion and the chemical processes involved in ozone depletion and what are the ways to mitigate the problems associated with ozone depletion. First of all, let us see what is ozone layer. See, the ozone layer is a thin, fragile shield that contains relatively high concentration of ozone. Therefore, it is a very thin layer and it has very high concentration of ozone and it is shielding the earth from much of the harmful ultraviolet radiation that come from the sun. In case if the ozone layer is not there, definitely that will be in high trouble, because the ultraviolet radiation are very high energy particles and therefore their impact on the human being and the earth, that is much more devastating. See the diagram, what are the layers of atmosphere. The bottommost layer, that is troposphere, it is hardly some 10 kilometer. And then comes the stratosphere up to 40 kilometer, 40 to 50. And then comes the mesosphere and then the thermosphere. And the last, that is exosphere. And so these are various layers of the atmosphere. And the today's phenomenon is mostly prevalent in the troposphere and the stratosphere. And mainly that the troposphere and the stratosphere that we will discuss now. And what are the temperature variation? See, look, in the troposphere, the temperature is decreasing when the height is increased. That means, as we are going above and above, in the troposphere, the temperature is decreasing. And then comes the stratosphere, there the effect is reverse. And there the temperature is increasing as we go above and above. And then comes the mesosphere, again that it takes a reversal. And then the last, the thermosphere, and that it is very high temperatures, it is very warm. And therefore, here the x-axis that we take the temperature and the y-axis we take the altitude. And therefore, that is, as we are moving within the troposphere, the temperature goes on decreasing, and that is when there is a difference between the troposphere and the stratosphere, that tropopause, stratopause and mesopause. So, these are all the intervening space between two layers. And the troposphere, that is the lowest layer, about some 15 kilometer. It contains normal air composed of nitrogen, oxygen, water vapor, carbon dioxide, etc. And the temperature decreases with altitude. And then comes the stratosphere. It is above the troposphere. The temperature increases with altitude and it contains ozone layer between 10 to 50 kilometers. And that is depicted in the diagram. You see, On the x axis that we have taken the height, and the x axis we take the atmospheric pressure, and y axis the altitude, and here that we have taken the ozone partial pressure. And therefore, when we are plotting the ozone partial pressure, that you can see in the stratosphere only the ozone concentration that is very large, and therefore, this diagram that depicts that the ozone concentration is extremely high in the stratosphere. And now, how the ozone is formed? Ozone, that is O3, when the sunlight is falling on oxygen O2, then the oxygen molecule is getting the sun energy, and it is divided into oxygen, nascent oxygen and plus oxygen. And when this nascent oxygen is reacting with another oxygen molecule, we are getting O3. And what are the properties of ozone? It is a pollutant on ground level, because a component of photochemical smog, actually that it is causing smog at lower levels, and the same ozone at a higher level, that it is acting as a protecting layer, and it is protecting us from the ultraviolet radiation. And some other properties, it is splitting and regenerating repeatedly. That means, it is to some extent it is somewhat splitting and regenerating repeatedly, and the highest concentration in upper atmosphere, and the concentration decreases at lower altitude, and it is thinnest around the equator, and the concentration increases towards the pole. So, these are all some characteristics of ozone. And in case if the ozone is damaged, what will happen? It will naturally mean the entry of ultraviolet radiation, and therefore, it is making harm to the human being and the whole earth. And so, the ozone depletion happens by so many different ways, and there are some natural factors. The season, because the ozone depletion or the concentration of ozone is not uniform at all the time, and depending upon the season. For example, in winter the ozone concentration is much, and vice versa, and therefore, the season is one factor. And the second factor, the weather condition. What is the weather condition at a particular place, the temperate or hot zones and all, and the solar cycle. And so, these are all the natural factor which is causing the ozone depletion, and there are the man-made factors also. And what are they? Ozone depletion substances or ODS, they are the major cause of the ozone depletion, and they are the group of manufactured chemicals. And what are the ozone depletion substances? The chlorofluorocarbons, CFC 11, 12, CFC 13, and the methyl bromide CH3Br, and halones, halone 1211, halone 1301, and halone 2402, and carbon tetrachloride CCl4, and hydrochlorofluorocarbons, that is HCFC22 and HCFC123. And therefore, these are some of the major components which are causing the ozone depletion. And now, let us briefly discuss about the CFC, that chlorofluorocarbon, and they compose of chlorine, fluorine and carbon, and they were developed in 1930 by DuPont, and they are having low toxicity, chemical stability and cheap. And because of these properties, they were developed in industry for the purpose of aerosols, and they are used for making the refrigerant, the blowing agent, and making flexible foam, and cleaning agent and propellant. And therefore, in most of the cleaning agent or all the aerosol that we are using, some kind of the chlorofluorocarbons. and they were used in refrigeration quite some time back, but nowadays that they are being stopped. And these are all the aerosols, and mostly whatever comes by a spray type, and these are containing some small amount of chlorofluorocarbons and the refrigerator. And so, these are all the major cause for the ozone depletion, CDS. And now, what is the contribution you see on the x-axis, that is given the year taken from 1992 to 2008, and the y-axis that we have taken the contribution of various CFC, and here they have taken the equivalent chlorine. That means, chlorine is taken as the base in comparison that we are taking, and you can see CFC 113, halones, CCl4 and CH3 bromide, chloride, CFC 11 and 12. And therefore, that we can see that CFC 12, that is causing large amount of that ozone depletion in comparison with that HCFC. And so, the diagram itself is depicting that the HCFC is somewhat safer than that CFC 11, 12 and all, and therefore, we have to be very careful with the CFC rather than HCFC. And now, how they are interacting with the atmosphere, or how ozone is depleted, that let us see. And here already we have seen that ozone O3 is unstable and it is degrading slowly on its own, and the catalyst can greatly accelerate the process. See, for example, O3 gas is reacting with the catalyst X, and that is giving OX plus O2G. See, for example, by a small example that I can depict it. See, for example, it is O3, that means the blue color that you can say that it is oxygen atoms, and therefore, there are 3 oxygen, therefore, O3, and that is reacting with a catalyst. So, red color for catalyst, and therefore, O3 plus the catalyst X, and what it is giving, that catalyst is reacting with one atom, and therefore, it is OX, and therefore, the remaining, that is O2. And now, what will happen? This is unstable, that OX is unstable. So, now let us see this OX, that is reacting with another oxygen molecule, another oxygen atom, and therefore, again what will happen? This oxygen and this oxygen, they are combining together, and again that catalytic agent, that is left alone. And therefore, what is the net effect? This catalytic agent that has reacted with one O3, and it has converted that into O2, and again that it is now ready to react with some other molecules. And therefore, what is the net result? That net reaction is given, O3 is reacting with an oxygen, and therefore, 2 O2. So, again and again the catalyst is reacting with so many ozone molecules, and therefore, the ozone is gradually depleted and it will become oxygen. And so, in that way the ozone depletion is happening. Now, let us have a short break. Welcome back. Let us proceed. So, what is the net result? That O3 is reacting with an oxygen and it is giving 2 O2 gas, and therefore, in that way that ozone, that is gradually depleting and it is converting into oxygen, and at the same time the reactant, that means that the catalyst, that is not altering, and therefore, it is that is again that it will react with some other ozone molecule, and it will happen, the same process is repeated until that X, the catalyst, is destroyed or it is removed from that process. and so in that way the ozone that is converted into oxygen. And now what are the catalysts that let us see? The first is a hydroxyl radical, that is OH, and it is responsible for half of the ozone depletion, and it is a natural process, but it can be accelerated by the presence of methane or CH4, which is a greenhouse gas. And the second one, that is nitric oxide, that is N2O, and when N2O is that is when the light is falling on it, that it is producing NO, and that NO destroys O3 and it is forming NO2, and the NO2 is reacting with other molecules like OH or Cl, and it will create some other molecules, and therefore the second catalyst, that is nitric oxide. And what are the anthropogenic effect on the stratosphere zone? And chlorine and bromine, Cl and Br, and they are also causing the ozone depletion, and they produce the chlorofluorocarbon CFC. And now some anthropogenic effect on stratospheric ozone, and the chlorine and bromine, these are the two major contributors, and the primary cause of ozone depletion in the stratosphere, and naturally they are in low abundance, and they produce CFCs, the hydrocarbons having at least one hydrogen replaced by a halogen. And now how the chlorine that is causing the ozone depletion? The chlorine atoms from CFCs attack ozone, taking away ozone and forming chlorine monoxide, that is ClO. That means O3 and Cl, that will give you O2 and ClO. Now the chlorine monoxide then combines with another oxygen atom to form a new oxygen molecule and a chlorine atom. That means that ClO plus O, that will give you Cl plus O2. And so the chlorine atom is free to destroy up to some 1 lakh ozone molecule, and as we have already seen, there is nothing happen for that Cl or the catalyst molecule, and therefore again and again that they are reacting with the ozone layer, and they go on depleting the ozone molecules. And so in that way the ozone layer is depleted or destructed. And here the cycle, that ozone destruction cycle, and here the ozone, the oxygen atom, and that is reacting with Cl and ClO plus O, and so again that it is giving out oxygen and it will become Cl, and therefore in that way that chlorine is cycling again and again. That is what already that we have discussed in the previous slide. And here the same thing, the factories and homes that they are spewing out a large amount of CFC, and that is going into the atmosphere, and the sunlight, when the sunlight is falling on them, that is breaking down the molecule CFC, and they are destroying the ozone, and therefore when the scientists that they are testing the amount of ozone, the amount of ozone is somewhat lesser than the actual amount, and that is called ozone depletion, and sometimes if it is in large amount, that is called ozone hole also. The ozone hole, it is a seasonal decrease in stratospheric ozone at polar regions during spring. A polar vortex isolates the stratosphere above the poles in Arctic and Antarctic winters, and the CFCs are concentrated in this vortex, and the chlorine atoms break off CFCs in spring when the sun hits them, and therefore it is climate dependent, and this particular phenomenon is happening at the poles. And so you look at the diagram, here it is a polar region and here is a vortex, and therefore in this region what will happen, the amount of ozone that is very less in amount, and therefore, that is called a ozone hole. And here that you can see this portion that is called ozone hole. And now, let us see how the ozone depletion is affecting the human beings. First, let us see the plant process, and it is targeting the molecules, and the gene activity is affected, and it affects the photosynthesis and the metabolism, as these are the three basic activities for a plant growth. The whole plant growth is affected, and here see that even gene activities also are affected by the ultraviolet B radiation. See, now in ecology, what is the impact? It is negatively impacting the rates of photosynthesis and the growth in young plants, and it is negatively affecting the marine phytoplankton, and the reduced photosynthesis rates, reduced productivity could affect the nitrogen fixing also, and therefore, the marine ecosystem is highly affected, and the carbon fixation is also affected. And the disruption of plant cycles and food chains, it may limit plant growth and change plant form and how the nutrients are distributed, lowers the levels of surface phytoplankton in the ocean, and it damages the base of the ocean food chain, and therefore, the whole ecosystem that is being affected. And now, what are the impact on the human health? It is causing skin cancer, it causes eye damage such as cataract, and the immune system is also damaged, the reduction in phytoplankton, and the damage to the DNA in various life forms. And see, look at the diagram. Because of the ultraviolet B radiation that is falling on the eyes, it is affecting the eye, and therefore, it is causing the cataract. And see, look at the diagram, this eye is somewhat better, but actually this eye that is totally damaged. And that is the reason why generally people tell not to look at the sunlight directly, because there may be some ultraviolet B radiation, and when they are entering into the pupil directly, that they will damage the eyesight. And so, it is one of the effect of the ultraviolet radiation. And the second one, the skin cancer, and here the cell carcinoma, the basal cell carcinoma, and here the skin rashes, and therefore, they cause the skin cancer also. How horrible it is. And here the overexposure, that is suppressing the immune system, and it is accelerating the aging of skin due to high exposure. So, you look at the diagram, here the hands or the skin that has become aged, that means that premature, and it causes an outbreak of rash in fair skinned people due to photo allergy, and it can be severe, particularly that those who are fair, white in color, and generally because of the photo allergy, and it is making rashes in the fair skinned people, and this is another effect of the ultraviolet radiation. And see how it is affecting the DNA. See, the DNA is absorbing the ultraviolet radiation, and therefore, it is changing the shape in DNA, and it results in mutated cells, or the cells sometimes die also. See, you look at the diagram, the incoming ultraviolet radiation, that means the incoming photon, and here is the natural DNA, and here after the photo that ultraviolet radiation, see some of the genes they are broken, and if the radiation is severe, what will happen? Sometimes these may die also, that genes, and therefore, what will happen? They are called the mutated cells, and therefore, the gene mutation will happen, and therefore, they are causing the congenital problems. That means that the children who are born and they are having problems from the birth onwards. So, it is another effect of that ultraviolet radiation. And here, as we have already mentioned, the ozone hole, and see that the ozone hole that is depicted in 1980, the hole is somewhat small, and in 1988 that is little bit bigger, and in 1991. And therefore, that diagram is clearly depicting that the ozone hole that is gradually increasing, and particularly that it is happening in the polar region only, and therefore, the polar regions are much more sensitive to ozone depletion than the equatorial region. And now, how can we mitigate or how can we avoid the ozone depletion? There are certain alternatives for the chlorofluorocarbons, and so if we are using them, to some extent that we can avoid the ozone depletion. Now, this ammonia, propane and water, and therefore, these can be replacing the CFC, and they are cheap and they are abundant and they are not patented also, because all the CFCs they are patented and these are non-patented, and they are advantageous in using them also, and they are energy saving and they are cheap, and therefore, these can be utilized instead of that CFC, the chlorofluorocarbon, and therefore, already that we have seen that this one, these alternative, and they are causing somewhat less depletion, and therefore, that instead of using the CFC, that chlorofluorocarbon, that if we are using this material, then naturally that we can, to some extent that we can avoid. See, you look at the diagram. So, in comparison with hydrochlorofluorocarbons, and it is around some 4000 times that CFC12, and therefore, instead of using CFC12, that we may go for HCFC or the halones or even CCl4, and therefore, in that way that we can avoid the ozone depletion to a very larger extent. And now, let us have a conclusion. So, in this episode that we have discussed about ozone depletion, its definition, the causes of ozone depletion, the processes involved in it, the ozone depletion substances ODS, the effects of ozone depletion on humans, plants and the environment, and the ways to reduce ozone depletion, all have been discussed in detail. Now, let us have some questions. Mention 2 mechanisms responsible for ozone depletion. In which layer the ozone concentration is the highest? Ozone acts as a protective shield as well as a pollutant. How? The next, how catalysts accelerate ozone depletion? How many ozone molecules can be destroyed by a single chlorine atom? And the last question, mention some CFCs and their safe alternatives. So, dear friends, with that we conclude this episode. Thank you.